Best U.S. naval fighter of World War II, the F6F Hellcat. When the Japanese Zero first appeared over the Pacific in 1941, it was almost untouchable. Fast, agile, and deadly, it tore through Allied air forces from Pearl Harbor to the Philippines. American pilots flying outdated aircraft like the F8F Wildcat were outmatched. The U.S. Navy needed something that could not just meet the Zero, but dominate it. That answer came in the form of a blue steel monster, the Grumman F6F Hellcat. Born in the crucible of war, the Hellcat was designed with a single mission: to take back the skies. Grumman engineers, led by Ironworks founder Leroy Grumman, worked tirelessly, studying every scrap of intelligence from battles in the Pacific. The Navy sent them reports from pilots who had barely survived encounters with the Zero. Grumman's team learned its strengths: superb maneuverability and lightweight, but also its fatal flaws: poor armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and limited dive performance. So, in 1942, while the war raged across the Pacific, the Grumman plant in Bethpage, Long Island, roared to life. The design philosophy was simple: build a fighter that could outclimb, outdive, and outsurvive the Zero. The result was the F6F Hellcat, big, rugged, and brutally effective. Powered by the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engine, delivering over 2,000 horsepower, the Hellcat could reach 380 miles per hour and climb at nearly 3,500 feet per minute. It was heavier and less nimble than the Zero, but it could take punishment no Japanese fighter could endure. By mid-1943, the Hellcat entered combat. Its first taste of battle came during the Battle of Marcus Island. Japanese pilots thought they were facing more Wildcats. They were wrong. The Hellcat's 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns shredded enemy aircraft from hundreds of yards away. Its thick armor and self-sealing fuel tanks saved countless pilots who before would have gone down in flames. The tide was turning. As months passed, the Hellcat became the backbone of the U.S. Navy's air power. From the decks of the U.S. Essex, Enterprise, and Lexington, Hellcat squadrons spread across the Pacific like a storm. The aircraft fought at Tarawa, the Philippines, the Marianas, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Wherever there was an American carrier, the Hellcat's deep blue wings were there. The real proving ground came in June 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, better known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft launched from carriers and island bases to stop the U.S. invasion of the Marianas. They were met by waves of Hellcats. The air exploded in a deadly ballet of tracers and fire. Japanese Zeros dove from the sun, but the Hellcats turned into the attack, unleashing bursts from their Brownings. In just one day, U.S. pilots shot down over 300 Japanese planes, most of them Hellcat kills. One pilot, Lieutenant Alex Vrocku, destroyed 6 enemy aircraft in 8 minutes. The battle crushed Japan's carrier air force forever.
What made the Hellcat so effective wasn't just speed or firepower. It was its design for survival. Pilots called it a flying tank. It could return to the carrier riddled with holes, leaking oil, even with cylinders blown apart, and still land safely. The cockpit offered excellent visibility and armor that could stop a 20mm cannon round. The big R2800 engine could keep running even when half damaged. For young Navy aviators, the Hellcat wasn't just a fighter, it was a guardian angel. By 1945, the Hellcat had destroyed more than 5,000 enemy aircraft, accounting for 75% of all U.S. Navy aerial victories in World War II. Its kill-to-loss ratio was an astonishing 19-to-1, the highest of any Allied aircraft in the war. No other fighter, not even the famous P-51 Mustang or the British Spitfire, achieved that level of dominance in its theater. The Hellcat's legend was built on more than numbers. It was built on men. Pilots like David McCampbell, the U.S. Navy's top ace, who downed 34 enemy aircraft, including 9 in a single day, all from the cockpit of his F6F Hellcat Mincy III, or Butch O'Hare, who helped pioneer the tactics that made carrier air groups unstoppable. These men flew through hell and came out heroes. As the war neared its end, the Hellcat continued to evolve. Versions were adapted for night fighting, equipped with radar to hunt Japanese bombers in the dark. Others carried rockets and bombs to support Marines storming beaches. It was a machine that could do it all. Interceptors, bombers, escorts, and it did it all brilliantly. When Japan finally surrendered in 1945, the Hellcat had earned its title, the Ace Maker. Nearly every Navy ace had flown one. It had outflown, outgunned, and outlasted everything the enemy could throw. After the war, thousands were scrapped, but hundreds served in other navies, from Britain's Fleet Air Arm to France and Argentina. Its reign in the skies ended, but its legend lived on. Today, when historians look back at the Pacific War, they see the Hellcat as more than just a fighter plane. It was the embodiment of American engineering power, tactical intelligence, and the courage of those who flew it. It turned the tide of the Pacific War and gave the U.S. Navy the air dominance it had dreamed of since Pearl Harbor. As one Japanese ace later said after the war, "We feared the blue ones most, the ones that never burned even when we hit them." He was talking about the Hellcat. The F6F Hellcat wasn't the most beautiful or the fastest, but it was the most effective. It was the aircraft that won the Pacific skies, the hammer that broke the empire of Japan's air power. Its creators at Grumman called it just another job. History would call it one of the greatest naval fighters ever built.
Grumman F8F Bearcat. The Grumman F8F Bearcat is an American single-engined, carrier-based fighter aircraft introduced in late World War II. It served during the mid-20th century in the United States Navy, the United States Marine Corps, and the air forces of other nations. It was Grumman Aircraft's last piston-engined fighter aircraft. Adapted versions of the Bearcat have broken speed records for piston-engined aircraft. Today, the Bearcat is popular among warbird runners and air racers. Design and development. The concept began during a meeting between Battle of Midway veteran F4F Wildcat pilots and Grumman Vice President Jake Swerble at Pearl Harbor on 23 June 1942. At the meeting, Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Thatch emphasized one of the most important requirements in a good fighter plane was climb rate. Climb performance is strongly related to the power-to-weight ratio and is maximized by wrapping the smallest and lightest possible airframe around the most powerful engine. Another goal was that the G-58, Grumman's design designation for the aircraft, should be able to operate from escort carriers, which were then limited to the obsolescent F4F Wildcat, as the Grumman F6F Hellcat was too large and heavy. A small, lightweight aircraft would make this possible. After intensively analyzing carrier warfare in the Pacific Theater of Operations for a year and a half, Grumman began development of the G-58 Bearcat in late 1943.
Design. In 1943, Grumman was introducing the F6 F8 Hellcat, powered by the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, which provided 2,000 horsepower or 1,500 kilowatts. The R2800 was the most powerful American engine, so it would be retained for the G-58. This meant that improved performance would have to come from a lighter airframe. To meet this goal, the Bearcat's fuselage was about 5 feet or 1.5 meters shorter than the Hellcat and was cut down vertically behind the cockpit. This allowed the use of a bubble canopy, the first to be fitted to a U.S. Navy fighter. The vertical stabilizer was the same height as the Hellcat's, but had an increased aspect ratio, giving it a thinner look. The wingspan was 7 feet or 2.1 meters less than the Hellcat's. Structurally, the fuselage used flush riveting and spot welding with a heavy-gauge 302W aluminum alloy skin suitable for carrier landings. Armor protection was provided for the pilot, engine, and oil cooler. The Hellcat used a 13-foot 1-inch or 3.99 meters, three-bladed Hamilton standard propeller. A slight reduction in size was made by moving to a 12-foot 7-inch or 3.84 meters Aero Products 4-bladed propeller. Keeping the prop clear of the deck required long landing gear, which, combined with the shortened fuselage, gave the Bearcat a significant nose-up profile on land. The hydraulically operated undercarriage used an articulated trunnion that extended the length of the oleo legs when lowered. As the undercarriage retracted, the legs were shortened, enabling them to fit into a wheel well which was entirely in the wing. An additional benefit of the inward retracting units was a wide track which helped counter propeller torque on takeoff and gave the F8F good ground and carrier deck handling. The design team had set the goal that the G58 should weigh 8,750 pounds or 3,970 kilograms fully loaded. As development continued, but this was found to be impossible to achieve, as the structure of the new fighter had to be made strong enough for aircraft carrier landings. Weight-saving measures included restricting the internal fuel capacity to 160 U.S. gallons or 610 liters, later 183 U.S. gallons or 690 liters, and limiting the fixed armament to 4.50 cal Browning M2AN machine guns, 2 in each wing. The limited range due to the reduced fuel load meant it would be useful in the interception role, but the Hellcat would still be needed for longer-range patrols. A later role was defending the fleet against kamikaze attacks. Compared to the Hellcat, the Bearcat was 20% lighter, had a 30% better rate of climb, and was 50 miles per hour, or 80 kilometers per hour, faster. Another weight-saving concept the designers found was detachable wingtips. The wings were designed to fold at a point about 2/3 out along the span, reducing the space taken up on the carrier. Normally, the hinge system would have to be built very strong to transmit loads from the outer portions of the wing to the main spar in the inner section, which adds considerable weight. Instead of building the entire wing to be able to withstand high G loads, only the inner portion of the wing was able to do this. The outer portions were more lightly constructed and designed to snap off at the hinge line if the force exceeded 7.5 G. In this case, the aircraft would still be flyable and could be repaired after returning to the carrier. This saved 230 pounds. Prototypes. The design was completed in November 1943, and an order for 2 prototypes was placed on 27 November 1943 under the B-Air designation XF8F-1. The first prototype flew on 21 August 1944, only 9 months after the design effort started. The initial flight test demonstrated a 4,800 feet per minute, aka 1,500 meters per minute, climb rate and a top speed of 424 miles per hour, or 682 kilometers per hour. Compared to the Vought F4U Corsair, the Bearcat was marginally slower but more maneuverable and climbed more quickly. Testing demonstrated a number of problems, notably a lack of horizontal stability, an underpowered trim system, landing gear that could be extended only at slow speeds, an unreliable airspeed indicator, and a cramped cockpit. The test pilots also requested that 6 guns be installed. The stability problem was addressed on the second prototype by adding a triangular fillet to the front of the vertical stabilizer. The extra guns could not be incorporated due to weight and balance considerations. Production. The Navy placed a production contract for 2,023 aircraft based on the second prototype on 6 October 1944. On 5 February 1945, they awarded another contract for 1,876 slightly modified aircraft from General Motors' Eastern Aircraft Division, given the designation F3M-1. These differed primarily in having the R2800-34W engine and a small increase in fuel capacity. Deliveries from Grumman began on 21 May 1945. The end of the war led to the Grumman order being reduced to 770 examples, with the GM contract being canceled outright. An additional order was placed for 126 F8F-1Bs, replacing the 50 cal machine guns with the 20mm M2 cannon, the U.S. version of the widely used Hispano-Suiza HS-404. 15 of these were later modified as F8F-1N night fighters with an APS-19 radar mounted on the starboard wing. An unmodified production F8F-1 set a 1946 time-to-climb record after a run of 115 feet, or 35 meters, of 10,000 feet, or 3,048 meters, in 94 seconds, or 6,383 feet, or 32.43 meters per second. The Bearcat held this record for 10 years until it was broken by a jet fighter, which still could not match the Bearcat's short takeoff distance. In 1948, Grumman introduced a number of improvements to produce the F8F-2. Among the changes were a modified cowling design, taller vertical fin, and the slightly more powerful R2800-30W engine, producing 2,240 HP, or 1,670 kilowatts. In total, 293 F8F-2s were produced, along with 12 F8F-2N night fighters and 60 F8F-2P reconnaissance versions. Production ended in 1949, and the first units began to convert off to type that year. The last Bearcats were withdrawn in 1952.
Operational history: United States. The F8F prototypes were ordered in November 1943 and first flew on 21 August 1944, a mere 9 months later. The first production aircraft was delivered in February 1945, and the first squadron, Fighter Squadron 19 or VF-19, was operational by 21 May 1945, but World War II was over before the aircraft saw combat service. One problem that became evident in service was the snap-off wingtips not working as expected. While they worked well under carefully controlled conditions in flight and on the ground, in the field, where aircraft were repetitively stressed by landing on carriers, and since the wings were slightly less carefully made in the factories, a possibility arose that only one wingtip would break away, with the possibility of the aircraft crashing. This was replaced with an explosive system to blow the wingtips off together, which also worked well, but this ended when a ground technician died due to an accidental triggering. In the end, the wings were reinforced, and the aircraft was limited to 7.5 G. Post-war, the F8F Bearcat became a major U.S. Navy and U.S. Marine Corps fighter, equipping 24 fighter squadrons in the Navy and a smaller number in the Marines. Often mentioned as one of the best handling, piston-engined fighters ever built, its performance was sufficient to outperform some early jets. Its capability for aerobatic performance is illustrated by its selection as the second demonstration aircraft for the Navy's elite Blue Angels Flight Demonstration Squadron in 1946, replacing the Grumman F6F Hellcat. The Blue Angels flew the Bearcat until the team was temporarily disbanded in 1950 during the Korean War and pressed into operational combat service. The F9F Panther and McDonnell F2H Banshee largely replaced the Bearcat as their performance and other advantages eclipsed piston-engined fighters. The first combat for the F8F Bearcat was during the French Indochina War, 1946 to 1954, when nearly 200 Bearcats were delivered to the French forces in 1951 as part of the American support for the war. Since the Viet Minh did not have an air force, the French had no need for them as interceptors, and they were used in the ground support role instead. When the war ended in 1954 and French forces withdrew, 28 surviving Bearcats were donated to South Vietnam and served with the Republic of Vietnam Air Force from 1956. The Vietnamese Bearcats were retired from 1960 onwards, replaced with Douglas A-1 Skyraiders and North American T-28 Trojans as the Vietnam War 1957 to 1975 continued.
Bearcats have long been popular in air racing. A stock Bearcat, flown by Mira Slovak and sponsored by Bill Stead, won the first Reno air race in 1964. Rare Bear, a highly modified F8F owned by Lyle Shelton, went on to dominate the event for decades, often competing with Darrell Greenemeyer, another famous racer with victories in his own Bearcat, Conquest 1, now at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, and holder of a piston-engined aircraft world speed record in it. Rare Bear also set many performance records, including the 3-kilometer world speed record for piston-driven aircraft, 528.33 miles per hour, 850.26 kilometers per hour, set in 1989, and a new time-to-climb record, 3,000 meters, 9,800 feet, in 91.9 seconds, 6,425.9 feet per second, or 32.644 meters per second, set in 1972, breaking the 1946 record cited above.
When war came to the Pacific in December 1941, the U.S. Navy was badly outmatched. The Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0 ruled the sky, light, agile, and flown by men who had been training since childhood. In the early months after Pearl Harbor, American carrier pilots went into battle flying the stub-nosed F8F Wildcat, brave but outclassed. They fought hard, but they paid dearly. Reports poured back from Wake Island, the Coral Sea, and Midway. The Zero climbs faster, turns tighter, and kills easier. Inside a low brick building on Long Island, a small team of engineers at Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation read those reports with alarm. Their founder, Leroy Grumman, a former Navy pilot himself, believed an airplane must first and foremost bring its pilot home. His factory had already earned the nickname the Iron Works because its aircraft came back riddled with holes yet still flying. Now, in 1942, the Navy asked for something radical, an all-new fighter that could take on the Zero and win. The birth of a giant. Design work began even before the request was official. The project code was XF6F6, an evolution of the Wildcat but built around a monster engine, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder twin-row radial capable of over 2,000 horsepower. Grumman's engineers widened the fuselage, stretched the wings, and created a massive, rugged frame that could survive brutal carrier landings. Armor plates shielded the cockpit. Self-sealing tanks stopped leaking fuel from turning a hit into a funeral pyre. By June 1942, as the U.S. won its miracle victory at Midway, the first prototype took to the air over Bethpage. Chief Test Pilot Bob Hall throttled forward and the aircraft surged down the runway like a caged beast finally set free. The Navy watched carefully. The Zero still held the edge in turn radius, but this new fighter could dive faster, climb harder, and, most importantly, absorb punishment. The Navy ordered it into immediate production even before tests were finished. Within months, the F6F Hellcat began rolling off Grumman's assembly lines. Factories worked day and night. Women riveters and mechanics, many of them new to industrial work, joined the effort. In a single year, Grumman turned farmland into a city of metal wings. Baptism by fire. The first combat came in August 1943, when Hellcats from USS Independence swept the skies over Marcus Island. Japanese pilots, confident as ever, mistook the new blue aircraft for upgraded Wildcats. That mistake cost them dearly. The Hellcat's 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns fired over 6,000 rounds per minute, tearing through aluminum like paper. The kill ratio from that first mission was staggering, and it only grew. Over the following months, the Hellcat proved unstoppable.
Pilots praised its wide landing gear for forgiving carrier landings and its enormous range for deep ocean patrols. Mechanics loved its simplicity. Panels opened easily, engines changed overnight, battle damage patched in hours. It was a machine designed for war, not for elegance. The turning of the tide. By early 1944, the U.S. Navy had switched nearly every frontline carrier squadron to the Hellcat. When Task Force 58 steamed toward the Marianas, hundreds of them filled the decks of Enterprise, Lexington, Bunker Hill, and the brand-new Essex-class carriers. Japanese intelligence failed to grasp what awaited them. On June 19, 1944, they launched what they believed would be a crushing counterattack, the largest carrier airstrike of the war. Waves of Zeros and dive bombers streaked eastward from Guam and the fleet beyond.
Waiting for them, at 20,000 feet, were Hellcat squadrons orbiting like patient hawks. Radar guided the Americans straight to their prey. What followed entered history as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Hellcats tore through Japanese formations with disciplined fury. Lieutenant Alex Vrachu, flying from USS Lexington, shot down 6 enemy aircraft in 8 minutes. His gun camera film showed Zeros exploding into black smoke before they even saw him. By sunset, more than 300 Japanese aircraft lay scattered across the Pacific, a massacre that ended Japan's carrier air arm as an effective force. The Ace Maker. Among those Hellcat pilots was Commander David McCampbell, Air Group 15's commander aboard USS Essex. Tall, quiet, and methodical, McCampbell embodied the calm professionalism that Grumman's design rewarded. On October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, he led a dozen Hellcats against a Japanese strike of nearly 60 planes. When his wingmen ran out of ammunition, he fought on alone, downing 9 aircraft in a single mission. His tally, 34 victories, made him America's top Navy ace. The statistics tell the rest. By war's end, Hellcat pilots claimed 5,163 enemy aircraft destroyed for 270 combat losses, a kill ratio of nearly 19-1. No other Allied fighter achieved that record. But those numbers hide the human side, the fear, the fatigue, the courage. Pilots often describe the cockpit as a fortress. Armor plate clanged when struck. Bullets sounded like hail on a tin roof. Many returned to their carriers with wings shredded, oil leaking, and flaps half gone. Yet the Hellcat kept flying. As one aviator said, she could take a beating that would break your heart and still get you home.